we've got something which says new NI hike warning for UK business from Reach. So NI is obviously national insurance, but this is employers, not employees. And the reason for that, Owen, seems to be Labour made a guarantee not to put up lots of taxes. So they're left with a few that they can raise.
They hemmed themselves in, very stupidly, I would say, on this show during the election, I said that when Labour came to power, they were going to say there was a big black hole in the nation's finances and that there was a failure of the media to scrutinise that in the election because that would have forced Labour to say which taxes they were going to raise or which services they were going to cut. And the truth is, after 14 years of austerity, already our public services, especially if you throw in an ageing population, are falling apart. And there wasn't that discussion properly, and lo and behold, that's what Labour did. And because they, for example, said they weren't going to increase income taxes on the top 5%, which Keir Starmer committed to when he was standing for Labour leader, or increase corporation tax, that means there's very few taxes they can raise. And there is this, because of their arbitrary fiscal rule. So they've got an arbitrary fiscal rule they inherited from the Conservatives, which is about debt falling as a percentage of GDP, which is completely arbitrary and needless. But what that means in practice is if public services are going to fall apart, they're going to have to raise taxes. This is the wrong one. This is the wrong one to raise. And they should be going for income tax on the top 5%, who are doing very well.
Right.
Corporation tax, it's still lower than a lot of other richer countries. And I just think this will end up...
Is there going to be any moment you cover the show and call for tax cuts out of interest? We've got the highest taxes since the war.
No,
there won't be a moment.
Wealthy
20
people,
years or so, or
well-off Britons do not have the highest taxes since the war. That's not true. And if you compare us to other richer economies, our tax burden is significantly lower.
Look, let me just ask Emma. With your BBC hat on, you have to be a bit careful here, I guess.
Well, no,
I don't know. What do you think?
No, it's an interesting context post what was being described as a mini Davos yesterday in Britain, this bringing together of business leaders. So you've got this agenda on one side, which is about workers' rights, which we heard a lot about last week, how things are going to change for those who are employed. And at the same time, you're hearing about corporation tax being frozen for the rest of this Parliament to woo big business. And now there's the debate. It's budgets are often highly speculated about, but this is incredibly speculated about because it's the first of this particular government. Long time we've waited for to see what Labour would do with power. And it's about whether a manifesto pledge has also been broken here. Because, of course, the other thing just to say is economists fear the measure, as it says here, could end up hitting workers if the employers pass on the extra costs by either hiring fewer staff, reducing pay rises, or, critically, pension contributions.
I'm confused about what's going on because, as you point out, they had this big summit of big business yesterday and Keir Starmer said we're going to cut regulation. So, there's two sides to that. Then almost in time with that, they announced that employers are going to have to... they hint that employers are going to have to pay more tax. And it seems that the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing, Owen.
Well, there's not...
Is this a mistake or what?
I think there's just not a coherent vision for the country. And the problem with this government, if people are trying to work out why is it really in such a mess, is anyone around Keir Starmer who knows Keir Starmer will say privately that he lacks politics. And what he did is basically hand that over to a particular faction in the Labour Party who deal with all of that.
What, the politics of it?
Yes.
What, the Sue Gray faction?
He would be a good... people like Morgan McSweeney, who's his chief of staff, he thought he'd be good at being Prime Minister. And it doesn't work like that. It's not about, otherwise we just have a technocrat. We have civil servants to do that.
But I'm realising
that they have a vision for the country.
But no, well, it's funny you say it because I think it's always the other way around. I think that they are really lacking an Alistair Campbell. They really are. You realise how drilled Blair was.
I don't think it's...
But look at the chaos. So they get together, these business leaders, and they say we're going to cut regulation. And then Reeves hints she's going to raise employers' tax. But what's going on? What do you think of it?
Well, no, I also think last week what was interesting, I interviewed the business secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, and on one hand, and I'm sure you'll have very strong views on this, there was the idea that you'll be able to take your employer to court for unfair dismissal from day one now, rather than waiting 2 months. And at the same time, it'll be a 9-month probation period rather than the 6-month because business had sounded discontent. And I asked how those two things would work together. That is the critical question from that package. So I think just to speak to the point of people wanting to understand the politics or the vision, there is a frustration in some quarters about how things come together. So you're pulling that particular thread, which I think is going to be a theme of questioning.